Hello everyone. This week we are going to be discussing the correct ways to go about describing animal behavior and also quantifying it, meaning measuring it using actual numbers. Now that might seem like kind of a tricky thing to do with behavior, but there are actually a few very straightforward techniques that can be used to document certain behaviors in an animal using real data. But before we get into any of that, there are a couple of key ideas that we have to go over. The first of these is the idea that there is a difference between observations and interpretations, also sometimes called inferences. Okay. Now, an observation, you've probably heard that word connected to science. Observations are what you can see, and that's it. Okay? You're not explaining why what's happening is happening. You're not trying to ascribe motives to the animals that you're observing. You're just watching and stating what the animal is doing. Okay? So observations are simply what you see, with no explanation. The idea here is you are trying to collect data that is not subjective. Subjective means up to interpretation or open to interpretation. Okay? You have collected good observations if another person watching the same behavior would describe it the same way. Now, interpretations or inferences, by contrast, do involve explanations. If you are interpreting something, you are trying to explain it. So in this case, interpretations try to explain what you're seeing. Okay. You're trying to ascribe motive. What is motivating that animal to behave the way it is? These are usually feelings. Okay. Things like fear, happiness, even stuff like hunger. All of these are interpretations of a given behavior. You're trying to explain why an animal is doing what it's doing. It's running away from something because it's afraid. It's running towards something because it likes it. These are all attempts at explaining why the behavior is happening and not descriptions of the behavior itself. Okay. Now, you know if you are interpreting what you're seeing if another person watching the same behavior that you are watching might explain it differently. Now, in animal behavior, we are trying to stick with observations. When we collect animal behavioral data, we want to only make observations, not interpretations. Think of these as recording just what is happening. Okay? Interpretations can be made later. After you've collected data, you can then go back and try to see what it means, what story it's telling you. Okay? Interpretations are the why, and you don't get to ask why until you've already collected your what data. First, you have to describe what's happening. Then you can try to describe why it's happening. Now, this is easiest to demonstrate using an example. So in the module, there is a video titled Dolphin Interaction Example. That's the video we are going to watch now. All right. I'm not going to maximize it because the resolution's kind of low. We're just going to watch it here in the little screen. Now, watch this video once all the way through without commentary from me. See if you can see what's happening. All right. Probably you noticed that there are dolphins in this video. That's observation number 1. Okay. If you were watching this video and not worried about making observations versus interpretations, you're just interested in what the dolphins are doing, probably your first thought was that there must be something wrong with that young dolphin. Young dolphins are called calves. All the adult dolphins were definitely focused on that one calf, so there must be something wrong with it. Dolphins are known to be social, they're known to be very gregarious, meaning friendly. Most people, when they watch the beginning of this video, they see that adult dolphin trying to help that calf. The calf must be drowning, other dolphins come to help. This is a very common interpretation of this video. Okay? But watch again. You'll notice that as the adult dolphin and the calf start swimming downwards here at the beginning of the video, right there, that calf is doing just fine. She's able to swim. She's not having any trouble. You might also notice that the calf is a darker color than the adult dolphin. That's another important observation. These are all statements that another person would agree with me on. The calf is slightly darker in color than the adult. Both appear to be swimming without help. Those are observations. They're not up to interpretation, right? I'll show you some other examples of observation. As the video progresses, you see right here, there, the adult dolphin is pushing the calf down. The adult dolphin is placing her head above the calf's body and then swimming downwards. The calf is pushed in front of the body of the adult dolphin towards the seabed. Now notice those were all observations. They're just descriptions of what I'm seeing in the video. Those are the best observations to record. There's no explanation involved. You're simply stating what you're seeing. You're describing what you're seeing. Notice the calf is pushed all the way down to the seabed. And then these other dolphins start to arrive. Now compare the new dolphins to our existing adult dolphin. So you notice our existing adult is gray, uniformly gray, But these new dolphins, there, they have dark sides. Those are actually another species called a porpoise. So we've got gray dolphins and porpoises, two completely different species interacting. You notice in the upper left, we have another gray dolphin showing up here. Okay? But there's a lot of porpoises around. Now if you watch, you'll see that the porpoises are very concerned with what the dolphins are doing. It gets a little hard to see here, but you'll notice that the porpoises are swimming in amongst the gray dolphins and interfering with what they're doing. They're getting involved. Okay? Let's watch the beginning again. Remember how we noticed that this young dolphin is slightly darker in color than the gray adult? That's because that's not a young dolphin. That's a porpoise calf, juvenile porpoise. So what we saw in this video, what we observed, was that this adult gray dolphin pushes this porpoise calf down to the ocean floor, pushes it down. Other porpoises and other gray dolphins arrive, and they begin interacting, swimming together, sometimes swimming into each other, sometimes colliding. And it's hard to see, but right here, the calf is able to swim towards the other porpoises and away from the dolphin. Now, if I was going to interpret this based on all those observations, here's what my interpretation would be. And it's based on research I've done into dolphin behavior that helps me understand the observations I made. So after reading up on dolphins, here's my interpretation of those observations. Gray dolphins are well known for their tendency to drown calves of other species. Now that gray dolphin is actually most likely a male. The males are the ones that tend to drown the calves of other species, especially porpoises. And we think it's because gray dolphin males will kill the calves of gray dolphin females, try to encourage that female to be ready to mate again. So when female dolphins have a calf, they're not interested in mating until that calf is mature. If a new male comes along and happens to kill that calf, that female will suddenly become receptive to mating again, and that male has a chance to mate with her. Notice how our interpretation of this behavior changed after we started to do a little bit of close observation, and also after I went off and did some research on how dolphins interact with porpoises. It's easy to misunderstand or misinterpret animal behavior based on our pre-existing knowledge of an animal and based on our own human biases. Okay? We expect dolphins to be helpful, so we see their behavior as helpful, even when it isn't. This is why it's so important to understand the difference between interpretations and observations. Observations are indisputable. They're simple statements of fact, and they are going to be our best description of an animal's behavior. They don't involve our own biases or our own interpretations, which are based on our individual experiences and are subjective, meaning they have the potential to be wrong. Right? So always try to stick to observations. All right. Here's the next step in understanding how to describe and quantify behavior. If you're getting ready to do a behavioral study on an animal, you have found an animal, maybe in its natural habitat, you're ready to start collecting behavioral data on it, the very first thing you need to do every time you sit down to collect behavioral data is you need to set the stage for your observations. What this means is you need to describe the environment. that your animal is in that moment. So let's say, describe the environment that your animal is in at the time you're observing them. The important idea here is you need context for your observations. Different factors like, say, landscape. Is this a rocky area? Is it hilly? Is it flat? Habitat. Is it a forest, a desert, a grassland? And weather. Is it cold out? Is it sunny? Is it raining? And finally, other animals. Are there other species around? Right. All of these factors can influence the behavior you're seeing in your animal. Some animals behave differently under cold conditions than warm. Animals that are used to being in a grassland environment and happen to find themselves in a forest instead are going to have their behavior affected by that. You're going to see very specific behaviors in forest-dwelling animals that you don't see in savanna-dwelling animals or grassland-dwelling animals. So describing the landscape, the location, the weather, all of those conditions can help you later on to explain why you saw the behaviors you saw. All right, finally, let's talk a bit about how you go about describing behaviors. Remember, these are all going to be observations. You get to interpret later, but not now. You need to be as descriptive and as factual as possible. Look for things like body posture. Literally, how is the animal holding itself? Is it sitting? Standing? Is it using some parts of its body more than others? Is it swinging its arms? Is it stamping its feet? That's body posture. That's something you can easily describe. Also, movements. Okay. Things like swinging arms. Use some of the ones I just said. Walking. Even feeding. Okay. All of those are movements you can describe. The timing of these things, too, can be very important. So, for example, how long was the animal walking? Okay. How often did the animal walk? And sort of connected to timing are sequences. Do some behaviors seem to happen before or after others? You're looking for patterns here. Seeing if there are linkages between specific behaviors. Right. These are the kinds of things you're going to start out watching for as you begin observing animals. Okay. Now, there's two different types of observations you can do. Okay. There are what are called continuous observations. Actually, we'll just put continuous. But there's another type too called instantaneous. These are two different ways to do your observations. You can probably guess at the difference between them just based on the names. Continuous observations is you are recording behavior continuously. It means that you are watching an animal for a set period of time, and you write down every single thing that animal does during that time period. You don't take any breaks, you don't look away, you're constantly recording behaviors. Now that's different from instantaneous. Instantaneous observations happen at intervals. For example, maybe it's every 20 seconds, could be every 2 minutes. The main idea here is that at these time intervals, you record all behaviors happening at that moment. This is sort of like taking a photograph every 20 seconds and then going back through those photographs and recording all the behaviors that you see in the picture. Right? So the way you would do this in the field when you're collecting data is you'd have a timer set on your watch. It would go off, say, every 2 minutes. Each time it goes off, you write down every behavior you see happening at that moment. Then you wait another 2 minutes. You don't collect any data during that time. When your timer goes off again, once again, you record every behavior you see at that moment. Right? So while in continuous data recording, you are always recording new behaviors as they happen. In instantaneous recording of behaviors, you are ignoring the vast majority of the time that's passing and instead only recording data at these specific intervals. All right, now there's one more thing we need to talk about when it comes to collecting data on these animals. We make our little crew of animals here a bit bigger. I'm going to use these guys to help explain the three primary ways that we collect behavioral data. These are three different approaches to collecting this data, three different approaches to formatting your data collection method. All right, so these are methods. The first is continuous scan sampling. If you were using continuous scan sampling as your data collection method, you would be watching this entire group of animals for a set period of time. Okay? You would record all behaviors for that entire time period. Let's say it's 20 minutes. So you'd record all behaviors you see for 20 minutes. That would be your sampling technique. It's called scan sampling because you're literally scanning across all of these different animals, all these different individuals, and collecting data on what they're doing. And you're doing it constantly. So every time you see the giraffe strip some leaves off a branch and eat them, you record that. Maybe at the same time, this parrot is taking off, you'd record that. Maybe a half a second later, this lion comes running in and attacks the zebra, you'd record that. You're recording absolutely everything that happens during this time interval. Okay, so you're scanning across the group, collecting data on what they're doing. Now, that's in contrast to our second method, which is called instantaneous. Scan sampling. Now, in instantaneous scan sampling, you are still going to be watching the entire group of animals, but you're only going to record behaviors that are seen at maybe a 2-minute interval. Okay. For example, the time interval can be varied depending on the animals you're watching. It could be 20-second intervals, 2-minute intervals, 5-minute intervals. It just depends on the animals you're watching. 2 minutes is a pretty common interval duration, though. And again, you're scanning across the entire group of animals, but you're only doing it every 2 minutes, and you're only recording the behaviors you see at that 2-minute mark. Then again at the 4-minute mark, then again at the 6-minute mark, and 8 minutes. You get the idea. Now, our last sampling technique is called continuous focal sampling. If you use this method, you're no longer scanning a group. You are focusing, hence focal, on a single animal. Okay? Maybe it's the cheetah here. Okay? If the cheetah is our focus animal, he's the only one we're going to be watching. Focal sampling is almost always continuous because you're only watching a single individual and they're easy to keep track of in a group nonstop. Again, you will collect data continuously. You'll record behaviors. Continuously for a set period of time. Let's say it's 20 minutes. You use focal sampling and scan sampling under different circumstances, right? Focal sampling can be very interesting if you're watching one individual in a group that are all the same species. Like, for example, if you're monitoring a herd of zebra, you pick one zebra, record their behaviors of that focal individual continuously for 20 minutes, and then maybe you go back again and scan sample the whole herd, and perhaps do instantaneous sampling instead, since there's a lot of zebras and it can be hard to keep track of all of them continuously. If you combine your focal sampling data, you've got a nice continuous observation set, so you know how individual zebras budget their time between different behaviors. But then you also have this scan sample, which is representative of how behaviors are distributed across the group over a given period of time. So you can combine these different sampling techniques when you're studying a given animal group, and you can use all of that data later on to answer questions. Some of the questions you can answer are things like, how much time do herbivores like zebras spend grazing as opposed to traveling from one location to another? The time budget, which is what that's called, how much time animals spend on things is referred to as their time budget. The time budget can tell you which behaviors are most important to the animal. If animals spend the majority of their time feeding, it probably means that their food source is either low value, meaning they have to eat a lot of it to get enough energy, or they have a highly active metabolism, so they burn through their energy quickly. Those are both interpretations of that time budget data. So you see, the different sampling methods can give you kind of different information, right? Instantaneous scan sampling can give you insights into things like vigilance behavior. So if you're watching that same herd of zebra, and every 2 minutes you're collecting data on what the zebras are doing, what you might see is that every 2 minutes there's at least a few zebra whose heads are up and scanning the environment. And you'll notice that every single time you collect data, every 2 minutes, there's always zebras with their heads up, watching the environment. It's not always the same zebras, but there are always zebras watching. That's vigilance behavior. In a group of herbivores like zebras who are preyed on by lots of predators, you're always going to have some individuals who are keeping their eye out for threats. That's an interpretation you can get from that scan sampling data. Now, you are going to have a chance to practice these different approaches to collecting behavioral data. If you look at the module for this lab, the very first file is our Lab2 Pdf. Make sure you download this PDF. Okay? When you do, it looks like this. This document has your instructions for how to complete the lab. Okay? Here's your 3 sampling techniques that you are going to get to practice today. If you would like more information, well, in fact, you'll need more information on these sampling methods, refer to these pages and chapters in your lab manual. Okay? Now for this lab, you are going to choose one of these 4 videos. The videos are long duration videos of these different groups of animals just interacting and behaving. Your options are horses, capuchin monkeys and squirrel monkeys interacting, flamingos, and meerkats. Okay, now whichever video you choose, you have to use it for the entire lab. Right? You're then going to be walked through the steps of setting the stage, using scan sampling, and then using focal sampling. Okay? I give you a sample data sheet. You can use this if you would like to format your observations and record your data. You can also do this on your own separate sheet of paper. I'd recommend that because you're probably going to need more room than what you're given here. Okay? Now you can either click on the video links here in the document, or if you go back to the module, you see all those videos have been linked in the module as well. Now at the end of this lab, if you go to the very end of your document, you'll see that there is a lab write-up. Okay? This write-up is due next Friday, uploaded to Canvas by 11:59 p.m. Note that these lab write-ups will come at the end of almost every lab we do. These write-ups should be typed. Okay? However, any data you collected during the lab, any worksheets you filled out, you don't have to retype those. Those can be handwritten. That's totally fine. Now, these are the sections your lab report has to include. It must have a title. Give it a title that feels scientific, all right? Don't just say this is Lab 2. In your BIOL 131 class, it should be a descriptive title that explains what you did in a scientific way. Something like behavioral observations of the zebra. Something like that, okay? The next section you have to include is the objective. What was the purpose of me having you do this lab? What were you supposed to get out of it? What was it supposed to teach you? I want to see that in your own words. It doesn't have to be long, only 2 or 3 sentences, but it should be pretty detailed, okay? Be specific. What specifically were you supposed to get out of this lab? Next up, procedure. This is going to be about 5 to 6 sentences. You need to describe in your own words all the steps you took during your observation of the animals in these videos and how you went about describing their behaviors. Okay. Finally, it's the results section. Or I'm sorry, almost finally is the results section. The results section will only consist of these tables. Okay. There will be 4 tables total. I do expect them to be typed. Okay. The lab talks you through how to make each of these tables. And then finally is discussion. For this part of the lab report, discuss your results. Tell me what you saw and why you think you saw it. The discussion here is where you get to interpret everything that you observed. Up until this point, you've been making observations, you've been describing the behaviors only. Now you get to interpret them. Okay? You can also include things like, did you see the behaviors you expected to see? Was there anything unusual or surprising about the behaviors you observed? Make sure you identify any patterns you saw, like which behaviors were most common. Did certain behaviors only occur when other behaviors were happening too? And then give me a little bit of reflection about what you learned by doing this lab. Okay. Now you've got to upload this report typed, and then make sure you upload photos of all of your worksheets and handwritten notes. Okay? Anything you wrote down while you were watching the videos, make sure you upload those as well. And you are going to upload them here. Okay, this is the link to the assignment page. This is where you'll turn them in. All right, folks, that's all we have for this week. I look forward to seeing you in lecture. Have a fantastic week until then.